Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive. If you're expecting to see David Sachs here, the great entrepreneur and software expert, hey, he's been unavoidably delayed. Hopefully, he'll be popping in here shortly, and we'll bring him right in if that happens. But in the meantime, we've got a lot of important things to talk about, and so we're going to go ahead and push ahead with this because the issue that we're going to be discussing today is one that is perhaps one of the most profound topics we've discussed in our show since we've started, and that is what is the risk that the United States faces in potentially getting drawn into this Middle East war. And I think the chances are a little bit higher than you might think, and definitely higher than I'm comfortable with. But I want to go through some of the issues that are at stake here and what some of the possibilities are and what we need to be watching out for. Now, a couple of days ago, the Israeli Minister of Defense went before a lot of his troops and said that, hey, we're probably getting really close to launching this ground invasion. And that's really going to be, as I'll talk about on the other side of this clip, what could be the trigger for where all this goes next. Here's what he had to say.
המשיכו להיערך להתקפה כי היא תגיע. אנחנו נערכים ביסודיות, זאת תהיה התקפה קטלנית, זאת תהיה התקפה משולבת מהיבשה, מהים ומהאוויר. עשו את העבודה שלכם, תתכוננו, אנחנו נפעיל אתכם.
Now, there has been a lot of talk about what would be the next trigger. If this just stays in the Gaza Strip, if this just remains a fight between Hamas and the Israeli Defense Forces, this will be contained and it'll be in there. But you have to the north of Israel in Lebanon, Hezbollah. And as we've been talking about on this show, and I'm sure you've heard if you've been paying any attention to the news at all, they have threatened, many of their leaders have threatened that if Israel does launch this ground incursion, that they are going to get involved, that they are going to open a northern front against the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, who knows whether they do or whether they don't? That remains to be seen. As I think I said on Fox News last night, I think that the chances are, if they're making tactical decisions, that even if Hezbollah had made a firm decision that they're going to go in, they may not immediately launch off when the Israeli Defense Forces launch their incursion, because they may wait until the IDF thinks, okay, well, I guess they're not coming, they're deterred, and then they put all their focus on the Gaza Strip itself. They get into the fight, maybe they get weeks into it, and they start suffering casualties, and then when they're not expecting it, then Hezbollah could launch in from the north. That's the biggest danger, I think, for the IDF itself. But the bigger issue is what happens after that. Now, a number of American figures have been making lots of boisterous claims here of late that have direct relation to that. Here's one from the ever, hawkish Lindsey Graham. Here's what he had to say.
Iran, if you escalate this war, we're coming for you.
Are you effectively poised to declare war on Iran? That's very strong language.
I am poised to use military force to destroy the source of funding for Hamas and Hezbollah.
Okay, as we've talked many times here, look, I get it. You don't like Iran, and you want to punish them if they do something. First of all, the United States can't just go to war because even just the president feels like it, or we don't like what somebody's doing, so we're going to go to war. That's against our Constitution on the first point. Only the Congress, not a member of the Senate, not even the president, can just take us into war. That's got to be a declaration of war that only the Congress has. They have to authorize this, and they're not going to authorize it unless they're meeting, which is a separate issue for the House of Representatives, but we'll talk about that later. But the bigger issue is this in America's national interest? And of course, as I argue, absolutely not. War with Iran under any circumstances is not in American national interest. Iran is deterred on our normal force posture because they know they are limited in where they can go. They can't initiate a conflict beyond a certain, kind of using their proxies and going on a small scale, because they know that to do so would be inviting America strong retaliations, which they know that they're powerless to stop against. So they're not going to seek war with us. They're going to be a nuisance and they're going to try to be a problem around the edges, but they're not going to seek out war unless we decide to go in, and then they could get involved. So if you now have the United States getting involved against Hezbollah, and if then Iran gets involved, now then everything is just off the table in terms of any kind of restraint. And God only knows what may happen then. And then we have the issue that things could escalate beyond that. And I don't know that anybody's really ready for that or thought through very much. Now, on Tucker's Twitter show, X Spaces, I believe it's now called, I think it was just last night, Doug McGregor was concerned about this, as a lot of people are. Here's what he had to say.
Do you think that we are moving toward war with Iran?
Yes, I do. And it looks like the chosen destination is indeed Armageddon. There doesn't seem to be any real appreciation for the implications for us and frankly, for Europe and the world, as well as the Middle East, of such action. You know, take for an example, just on the economic side, about 20% of the world's oil passes through the Straits of Hormuz every month, probably 25% of liquefied natural gas. And you're talking about shutting down 2 to 3 million barrels a day of oil from Iran. The bottom line is that we need to think this through, and everyone right now is emoting. There is no thinking anywhere, as far as I can tell. The only possible exception may be, amazingly enough, Mr. Erdogan in Turkey, who came out this morning and indicated he was willing to mediate.
Now, as you're probably also aware, the United States already has one aircraft carrier strike force in the Mediterranean, in the region there, and the second one, the Eisenhower Strike Group, is closing in on the area as well. So there's a lot of firepower being sent there. Now, there's also a lot of vulnerability that we have here. I've been arguing for years that our troops, and especially in Iraq and in Syria and in many parts of Africa, do nothing for American vital national interests at all. None of our interests are being secured there, but they are a point of vulnerability. Now, we've already seen in just the last few days that Americans, and I think even overnight, as we're making this live here, overnight, there was additional attacks on U.S. service members in the Baghdad area. So far, thank God, none of them have resulted in any Americans killed. But the minute that happens, and it's almost like we're just rolling the dice, waiting to see when that does happen, because if an American troop is killed, there's going to be an outcry for some kind of retribution. And you can be sure that there's going to be no shortage of people immediately ready to point the finger at Iran, and they're going to be wanting some response. Now, Secretary of Defense Austin underscored some of this concern about our vulnerability in the area, and here's what he said.
Concerned about potential escalation. In fact, what we're seeing is the prospect of a significant escalation of attacks on our troops and our people throughout the region. And because of that, we're going to do what's necessary to make sure that our troops are in the right, good position. They're protected, and that we have the ability to respond.
How are you going to do that? How are you going to make sure they're protected? And look, why do we have American troops that are just sitting out there in harm's way to be protected? I mean, think about that for a second. The whole purpose of our troops is to keep us safe. And now then, because of their vulnerability, they're just sitting out there in the desert, basically. They have to be protected from all of these nefarious actors who may be acting. Because, you know, Iran does control a lot of these violent groups that are out there, and a lot of these jihadi groups, but they don't control them all. And some of these are acting on their own. And I mean, they're famously shifting alliances back and forth. And many of them just have, you know, hatred for America because they don't like many of the operations that we've done over the last couple of decades. And of course, we strike them left and right as the days go on. But they already have this dislike for us. Now, if they have motivation, and especially if even Iran does actually push them in there, now then you could potentially have Americans killed for no reason. And this, one of the reasons why this is such a pointed issue to me, and an emotional issue, is that obviously I served in uniform. I fought for combat deployments, and like everybody else who joins voluntarily our forces, we do so with the tacit understanding that we may one day have to sacrifice our life in defense of our nation. And most all of us are perfectly fine with that, and we actually consider it a point of honor that we would be willing to die for our fellow countrymen if necessary. What we don't sign up for, however, is to just be a pawn placed in the middle of a desert somewhere and hoping that the bad guys don't, you know, have a bomb that lands on target, or that we sacrifice our life in the defense of nothing. We're just sitting there that we need to be defended. That's not how you should use American troops. And I'll just point out, say it right now, flat out. before, God willing, this doesn't happen. But if it does, if any of those troops are killed, I don't want to hear any platitudes coming from any of our leaders, any of our members of Congress, and saying, "Oh, we respect them so much, we honor they sacrificed their lives defending our interests," because it won't. If that happens, they won't have died defending anything of value to the United States. They will have died because our leaders didn't get them out of harm's way when there was no reason for them to be there. So I hope that we get that out of the way, get them out of the way quickly. But that just underscores the risk here. So if Israel goes in to the Gaza Strip and they launch their operation, and then Hezbollah comes in, and now then the thing sparks out into a wider war, there is huge risk for us and to get involved. And now once American troops get hit, and then if we respond, then you see the tit for tat, that everything keeps going up the escalation ladder. Now all of a sudden we're fighting a war potentially against Iran, against Hezbollah, against many of these other Islamic jihadi groups. And now that we can't just put out all these little fires. And oh, by the way, this comes while we're also still trying to support Ukraine in its war against Russia with, scores of billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, while we're sending hundreds of thousands of artillery shells now to Israel in their fight. What if we need this? I've been saying this many times on previous deep dives. What if we get into a war and we actually need all that gear? These 5,000 military vehicles we've already handed over to Ukraine, and now they're urgently requesting more for their continued operations. That comes out of our stockpile. That comes out of our military capacity to defend your rights, to defend your freedom, should it ever be called upon. And so we're already diminished because of what we've done for the last 20 months here. Now it's going down even faster with supplying emergency resupply into Israel. But if we stumble into a war and we need it, now all of a sudden our capacity is going to be limited, because we're already trying to ramp up production of 155 millimeter shells, for example, Stinger missiles, all the kinds of things, air defense missiles. We've given so many of those to Ukraine. Those are missiles that we don't have now. And if we start needing them into some kind of a conflict, we're going to find that our stockpiles run out pretty quick. And then how are we going to protect any troops or our ships in the sea? Or as McGregor talked about a minute ago, something happens in the Strait of Hormuz, and now all of a sudden the price of oil goes through the roof, and that just cuts the knees off of our economy. How are we going to handle that if that happens? And none of that is necessary. It is so vitally important that we understand there is no need for America to fight a war. Israel has a tough situation on its hand, and we can talk about the things that led to this war, but they have what they have. But their issue is with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. That needs to stay. It does not need to expand beyond. It doesn't need to expand to be Hezbollah. If it does, if Hezbollah comes in, we should not go to war. Israel can handle it. They have already demonstrated they can handle two front wars. They've done it before. Their Minister of Defense said that they're ready to do it again. They've already addressed that. So we should not get so eager for a fight that we immediately start getting engaged. Now, I hope the president doesn't do that. He has shown some understanding of the limitations of American power, and he has not gotten us involved, as far as he could have, even in the Ukraine situation. Let's hope that continues on, because it would be the worst thing in the world if we start fighting another power under any circumstances, because like happened in the First World War, just one little spark here could start this chain reaction of events that nobody can control. That's the key thing that we need to understand. Once things get set in motion, all of a sudden you have a lot of different actors who get to play cards. It's not just us. We don't just get to tell people what to do. And now all of a sudden you have the possibility of escalation, of miscalculation, of error, of mistake. Everything can go, and war just spins out of control. Because what happened in World War I is that you had a small issue between Serbia and its neighboring country in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That should have stayed with them. That should have just been a local little skirmish. It shouldn't have gone anywhere. But because of miscalculation and error, all of a sudden it engulfed the entire continent, and millions were killed in the process. And of course, now that we have nuclear weapons on the table, the things could get spun out of control pretty quickly and go places we would never have imagined. We should not take step one. You can't get into a war in the third or fourth step where you have problems if you don't take step one. Do not fight a war on this situation. Give Israel some support that it needs. We should not, under any circumstances, get involved in this war, no matter what happens with Hezbollah. Thanks very much. That's your deep dive for today. It's a real important one. We need to keep you safe, and you need to be informed about what's really going on. Share this with everybody that you can, because I think a lot of people don't know this and are not aware of how much risk there is. And when they see comments like Lindsey Graham and several of these others talking a bunch of smack about how we'll go and shoot missiles and blow this person up or whatever, they don't think about the consequences. You need to make sure they're aware of what's at stake here. We thank you for your time here, and we'll see you on the next deep dive. Thank you.